Welcome to Cosmic Chosen. They thought you were taking a break, resting, cooling off. But what you were really doing was being rebuilt in silence. Let this truth land softly on your spirit. You didn't win that house because you entered the drawing. You won because heaven entered you. The lottery wasn't chance, it was recognition. You were never in the line with the others because your name had already been written at the top. While they fought for crumbs, God was preparing your estate. And now you've been gifted with something they can't understand because they still think earning is the only way to receive. But you chosen one. You inherited favor, not for being perfect, but for surviving when everything tried to kill your purpose. They waited for your return. They rehearsed apologies in the mirror. They practiced manipulation as if your soul hadn't already evolved to detect it in silence. But here's the part they never saw coming. You didn't just leave their orbit. You were promoted to another realm. And that house, it's more than a structure. It's a symbol of elevation, of divine recompense, of what happens when you heal so completely. The universe hands you keys you never asked for, because your obedience was your ticket. So yes, it looks like a random miracle to them, but it was scheduled deliverance in disguise. You won without entering, because you were already chosen before the game began. Let them wonder. Let them circle. Let them finally feel the echo of your permanent silence. You're not just home. You are the home. And not everyone deserves to be invited back in. They didn't think you would really recover. They didn't think you were going to depart permanently. They secretly believed it was just temporary, even when you withdrew and said that you were finished. Perhaps you were just emotional, or perhaps you needed some distance. In any case, you would probably cool down and return, as you usually did, right? You showed forgiveness. You offered justifications. Even though they were giving you the worst impression, you made the decision to see the best in them. However, things were different this time. You departed the pattern this time instead of merely leaving the room. You didn't just go, you cut off all communication. That's the thing they're having trouble understanding. Not only are you gone, but you're also recuperating in private, without announcing it or requiring their approval. You already know how valuable you are, so you're not trying to prove it anymore. The fact that you're mending has rendered you inaccessible rather than resentful is what really screws with their mind. The part of them that wanted you to be damaged in order to feel complete can no longer reach you. You're not hostile. They are now seeing that they were a part of your suffering, not simply your existence. Whatever it was, the connection, the friendship, the relationship, it was something you made it through, not something you longed for. They believed that you would be held captive by your emotions, that your allegiance would serve as your leash, and that the tie would reunite you. However, healing is a continuous process. You finally realized the price of remaining while you were recuperating. You saw the aspects of yourself that had to be diminished in order to maintain harmony, the ways in which you were gradually losing yourself in order to maintain the relationship. They're beginning to see that you meant what you said now that you're gone, not out of rage or bitterness, but simply out of clarity. Furthermore, that clarity cannot be undone. It stings because that's what makes it real. You left because you wanted to improve, not because you were angry. And there's no way out of it. They're missing connection, not control. They're suffering because they lost control over you, not because they lost you. That's where the fire is. They're terrified of the change in power, not sobbing over the genuine connection. What's lost is the power they exerted via emotional coercion, guilt, and a mastery of manipulating your emotions. To them, you were always a role rather than simply a person. Even when they offered you every excuse to go, they knew they could rely on you to remain. It's not your love or compassion that they miss now that you're gone, but rather the possibility that they might foresee you, make a mistake, apologize either partially or not at all, and still expect you to change your ways. You were trustworthy because you cared, not because they deserved you. And they used that concern into a weapon. They mistook your permission for empathy. However, you broke the narrative they told themselves, that you needed them, that you would always choose them, and that they could always make things right later, when you left and really meant it. There is no later now. They just created a situation where they had more power. And now they are forced to acknowledge that you were never the one who was reliant on them. They're also seeing how much of their ego was dependent on your presence now that it's gone. They're choking on the knowledge that their power over you has ceased to exist, not love. And in the absence of that influence, they must sit with themselves, their decisions, and the reality that they had a true, devoted, and kind person. And since they believed they would always have another opportunity, they took advantage of it. However, you're a closed chapter and no longer get a second chance. When the other player left the board, the game ceased to be enjoyable for you. And it is the most agonizing loss of all for someone who is addicted to control. You're starving their ego now that they took advantage of your doubt. In the past, they flourished in the areas where you doubted yourself. They were able to distort reality each time you paused, second-guessed, or apologized for something that wasn't even your fault. Your skepticism made it simpler to control you and to defend their actions. They could maintain control if they could keep you in the dark. They therefore played on your fears, passed off criticism as concern, and had you wondering all the time whether you were the issue. And it was successful. You played tiny for a time. You turned down the light. In an effort to avoid overreacting or being too sensitive, you carefully considered every word, every text, and every response. They never once gave you the benefit of a doubt, but you did. You persisted in the hopes that your perseverance would finally win them over. However, it never materialized because they were taking advantage of your bewilderment rather than being puzzled themselves. Then, however, something changed. You began remembering for yourself and stopped asking them who you were. The patterns, the manipulation, and the fact that they only ever shown love when you were pushing away became apparent to you. You couldn't unsee it once you saw it. Everything changed at that point. They are now being starved by your trust. Now they don't disturb the guy who used to break down as they retreated. It's not even necessary to respond to the individual who used to plead for assurance. You are just disinterested. Your silence isn't cold. When someone has finished playing, they cannot play mind games with them. Someone who understands their value cannot be controlled by them. It's your confidence, not your absence or your fury, that's drying them out. You came to the realization that you were only with individuals who profited off your perception that you were too much. And the falsehood began to wither as soon as you stopped feeding it. They're the ones left in suspense now. The version of you that didn't know better is what they miss, not you. The version of you that didn't know any better is what people miss, not you. The one who rationalized their actions. The person who went above and beyond to maintain harmony, even if it meant betraying oneself. They missed the you who continued to give them opportunities because they believed that love required you to put their needs ahead of your own. It was simpler to deal with that version of you since you were reliable, reserved when it was important, and always willing to compromise in order to save others from feeling uncomfortable. It was a handy version. You were malleable, shaped by hope and remorse, and you always tried to be the greater person. Before you would dare to confront them, you would overanalyze everything. You were cautious because you didn't trust your gut enough to leave, not because you didn't notice the warning signs. Because you still believed they were deserving, they were able to reach you. However, that version of you is no longer there, and they are unsure of how to engage with the person you have become. You find the passive-aggressive remarks intolerable. When something doesn't seem right, you don't remain mute. You no longer pretend to be stupid in order to maintain the relationship. It worries them that you maintain your limits without going into too much detail. They are insulted, not perplexed, offended that you have a voice, a spine, and a standard, and that you have stepped out of the position they put you in. It's more difficult to control this new self. Now you ask inquiries. When you sense a lack of vitality, you leave. You believe your instincts rather than their justifications. They are missing your old habits, not your presence. The way you used to put people first, regardless of how little they contributed, and the way you used to justify the rudeness. You've outgrown the space they occupied because you've changed, and they know it in their hearts. Not only did you transform, but you also became uncontrollable. Because of this, The new you feels alienated and is someone they will never be able to see again. When you felt lonely, they expected you to return, but you found peace instead. They were so certain that the minute the stillness became too deafening, you would come crawling back. They anticipated that you would feel lonely enough to reach out, break the stillness, and revert to your old habits. They believed that the silence would make you weaker rather than better, since they saw your absence as a phase, a tantrum, or a bluff. Even if they never provided you anything to need, they felt that you still needed them in your heart. They were not prepared for the fact that you were outgrowing them as they waited for you to miss them. They thought your loneliness would act as a leash, but it turned into a mirror that revealed everything you had been denying. You were detoxing from a relationship that had been depleting you, not merely missing someone. And you discovered serenity there rather than emptiness. Distractions and rebounds didn't bring peace. Instead, it came from confronting the pain and understanding that it was more about losing yourself in them than it was about losing them. And something clicked once you began to reconstruct your pre-chaotic self. You didn't want their return, not by any means. Not on a night when no one is around. That was unexpected to them. They wager on your frailty, your tenderness, and your propensity for quick forgiveness. However, they never took your development into account. They never imagined that you would get to the point where their name no longer evoked a response, when you stopped hoping for closure and began making peace in their absence. They are now left to ponder what went wrong. Why haven't you contacted me? Why aren't you going back the way you always did? The solution is straightforward. If someone made you feel lonely when you were with them, you are no longer lonely. You don't want the uncertainty to happen again. You're not turning around. You're free at last. And the one thing they never imagined you would find without them is that freedom. You were the only one reacting, and you weren't overreacting. They used to accuse you of being too sensitive, emotional, and prone to misinterpreting situations. They would shut it down, reject it, and make you doubt your reality if you spoke out or said how anything hurt you or felt strange. You weren't overreacting. You were just responding in a situation when it was awkward to be emotionally honest. They wanted silent cooperation, not the truth. And you began to believe them for a while. You began to lower your voice, question your emotions, and consider if you were being tough. However, you understood deep down that it was responding rather than overreacting. The only one listening was you, being the only person assessing the state of a long-suspended relationship. The lone one making an effort to mend something that the other person wouldn't acknowledge was flawed. The stillness is overwhelming now that you're gone, but not for them nor for you, because the only true energy keeping everything alive was your presence. The pulse was your effort, your feeling, your readiness to be honest and feel fully. As long as it remained simple for them, you gave life to something they were quite content to let stagnate. Nobody is left to start the discussion now. There was no one left to make things right. Nobody remained to defend something they never did. Before your voice exited the echo chamber they established, it used to operate in their favor. And now they are left with the silence they once said they preferred, without you there to react, to answer, to attempt. However, it no longer feels serene. Instead, it seems empty. You were just awake in a scenario where the other person was emotionally sleeping. You weren't going overboard. They're finally noticing the stillness now that you're gone, but only because you were the source of the cacophony. Your silence is protection, not punishment. You're not demonstrating your argument by being silent. You're not disregarding others to attract attention. They won't miss you if you vanish. The reality is more straightforward and far more potent. You finally come to the conclusion that it's pointless to explain yourself to those who have no interest in understanding you. Giving emotional clarity to those who only ever come up to cause confusion is something you're done with. This quiet is a form of protection, not retaliation. You used to back and forth in an attempt to convince them of your point of view. You would attempt to make the connections for them, explain how you feel, and outline the consequences of their behavior. But for them, it was always about keeping you entangled, never about clarity. They would misrepresent your feelings, minimize your pain, and shift the attention back to themselves, but you persisted because you cared. In the hopes that they may truly hear you this time, you continued opening your lips and your heart. But after you've spoken all that needs to be said and the room still doesn't listen, you decide to keep quiet. You've ran out of access, not because you've run out of emotions. You are no longer the person who apologized only to maintain harmony, who stayed up worrying over every word, or who overexplained. Not with resentment, but with insight. You are now prioritizing your peace above their acceptance. They are beginning to take notice. They sense the change as they are unable to get you into the same old pattern for the first time. People who always understood precisely what they were doing are no longer the ones you're going up to protect. For them, it is what hurts. The fact that they can no longer utilize your voice to control the narrative is more important than your quiet. You're just unavailable for the chats that are costing you your sanity. You're not being frigid. For you, silence is a border, not a passive one. Additionally, the person has already lost access to both when they make you choose between their presence and your serenity. Their apology would be an acknowledgement of their true selves. They remain mute because reaching out would require facing the reality, not because they have moved on. The truth is also unattractive. They would have to own up to their mistakes if they really wanted to apologize to you. Nor that diluted version, nor that "I'm sorry if you felt that way" bullshit. Removing all of the justifications for their treatment of you would be a true apology. Additionally, their ego just cannot handle it. They don't care enough to be honest, since doing so would ruin the reputation they've established for themselves as well as for you. It would be like eating glass for them to suddenly take on responsibilities after avoiding it for so long. They avoid instead. They act as if it wasn't that horrible, since acknowledging that they have wounded someone who loved them sincerely would destroy the idea that they are the good one. They define your response as too much in order to preserve their story. They struggle with your absence because it makes them sit by themselves rather than because they missed the relationship. There is nothing left to divert their attention from the part they performed without you in it. You chose the calm path, the healing path, and the high road. You also left a mirror behind when you did this. The manipulator, gaslighter, liar, coward, and selfish person you saw at the end is the one they see every day when they look at it. Whatever mask they previously wore is now broken. By your departure, not by conflict. Since it's safer to remain silent than to run the risk of being discovered, they won't make contact. Losing you would be preferable to losing their version of events. The denial goes that deep. Their silence is self-preservation, not strength. Their words would expose everything they have attempted to conceal, not that they lack them. They also understand that there is no turning back once the truth is spoken aloud. They've come to the realization that you were the anomaly rather than the rule. They consistently thought of you as just another individual in their life's revolving door, someone who would come and go, someone who could be readily replaced, and someone whose emotions were optional. They believed your presence was weaker than their patterns. They believed that no one would ever hold them responsible, and that their typical approach to dealing with people was simply the way things were. You were just another name on a list, another face in the crowd, or another chapter in a story that kept repeating itself to them. They didn't think you were unique. They didn't believe you were unique. In actuality, though, you were the anomaly rather than the rule. It was you who saw past their barriers, the one who saw the cracks they had so desperately tried to conceal. It was you who stayed when others went, who paid attention when others left, and who showed concern when others gave up. You saw the true you behind their masks, not just the exterior. You still made the decision to give generously, though. It was difficult to find the honesty and rawness with which you loved. They were frightened by your appearance because it was genuine, and genuine is difficult to manage. Now that you're gone, they have to deal with an unfamiliar and unpleasant reality. They believed that someone else would easily fill the void left by you, and that it was only a question of time. However, that isn't how it operates. You were more than a stand-in. It has come to their attention that you were the exception. You were the one who pushed them to improve, to examine themselves, and to face the aspects of themselves that they attempted to avoid. Losing you means more than simply losing a person. It means losing the mirror that once held them accountable, without breaking, and reflected their actual selves back at them. They are beginning to realize that someone who merely accepts their surface cannot fill the void you left. They understand that no new individual will ever be able to match the depths you reached or the patience you displayed. They are then left with the option to either alter or continue the cycle. And that's where the pain lies. They never anticipated that you would permanently leave, so they never imagined that losing the exception would hurt this much. They're losing more than just a relationship when they lose you. They're losing the unique opportunity to be accepted and loved for who they truly are. And they never wanted to experience that loss. You can't attend their performances anymore. Like actors stranded on a stage, they never stop rehearsing their apology lines in the hopes that they will somehow win you back. They write heartfelt speeches that are full of half-baked explanations, promises they never kept, and tears they never truly shed. However, it is no longer relevant. The crowd that gave them innumerable encores and believed in their performance is no longer there. The days of waiting for an unattainable curtain call in the front row are over. You're too old for their drama. You have neither the time nor the energy to follow their cycles of denial, guilt, and fleeting charm. The never-ending back and forth and emotional roller coaster that used to captivate you now seem tiresome and useless. You can see through the script, so their performances don't evoke strong feelings in you. You recognize the pattern. The same lines, the same excuses, the same empty gestures dressed up as change. You're no longer available for their manipulations dressed as vulnerability. You've stepped off the stage because you finally realized the show was never meant for healing. It was meant to keep you trapped. They thrived on your reactions, your hopes, your willingness to believe in their potential. But that potential was just a fantasy they sold you to keep the audience engaged. Now the spotlight is on you, and you're shining elsewhere. You're building your own story, free from the scripts they wrote. And while they're stuck rehearsing apologies in the mirror, hoping to find the right words to undo the damage, you've already walked out the door. You're no longer a player in their drama. You're the director of your own life. And the theater of their dysfunction is a show you refuse to watch again. You were the stability in their chaos, and now they're spiraling. They always felt your tranquility was a weakness. They watched how you stood solid when everything around you seemed like it was coming apart, and they believed you'd break soon, that you'd crack under strain like everyone else. They leaned on your patience, your capacity to absorb their disorder without complaint, as if you were some sort of emotional safety net they could yank on whenever things got nasty. Your constancy wasn't simply a convenience for them. It was their hidden anchor, the subtle power preventing their world from disintegrating. But now that you're gone, their finely managed chaos is revealed for what it truly is: unstable, unpredictable, and entirely unsustainable. Without your grounded presence to catch the fallout, every little thing is tipping them over. The madness they tried to hold it back with your calm is suddenly crashing down in waves. The buildings they propped up with your tolerance and compassion are collapsing because they never established their own foundation. They were dependent on your strength to mask their flaws. And here's the fact they didn't want to admit. You weren't weak for staying steadfast. You were the only one who could. You were the steadiness in their storm, the voice of reason amid their clamor, the steady hand that saved things from spinning fully out of control. When you departed, you took that steadiness with you. And now, with no one else to steady the ship, they're flailing. They're sliding because they never learned how to be complete on their own. They mistaken your tranquility for an unlimited resource, something they could delve into any time they needed relief. It wasn't infinite, however. You made the decision to remain steadfast for them, the relationship, and the possibility that things would improve. That option is gone now that you've moved away. Their delusion of control accompanied it. It's likely too late for them to realize that you were the component that held the edges of the jigsaw together, not simply another piece. And without you, their pandemonium isn't just becoming louder. It's falling apart entirely. They saw that you elevated rather than just walking away. They believed you would vanish in agony, engulfed by remorse or sorrow. However, it was not the case. You ascended rather than just leaving. You entered a more self-assured, strong, and self-respecting version of yourself that they had never anticipated. They thought you would lose yourself in grief or turn around, shattered and pleading, but you overcame the chaos, the confusion, and the pain. Your departure was a metamorphosis rather than a retreat. What worries them the most is this progression. Someone who is angry, resentful, or trapped in the past is simple to deal with, but someone who pushes on with calm confidence and who rises above the sorrow rather than letting it consume them is a danger. It demonstrates that they never had as much control over you as they believed. Your development reveals their incapacity to keep up with your advancements, their resistance to change, and their stagnation. The old you was flexible, uncertain, and caught in their circle, so they don't miss it. They now have to deal with a different you, someone who refuses to accept emotional games, hollow promises, or half-truths. Not only did you end the connection, but you also ended your need for their presence, affirmation, and acceptance. You stepped out of their grasp and the narrative they attempted to construct for you. It hurts so much because of this. Instead of just walking away, you rose, and by doing so, you demonstrated to them what true strength looks like. The ability to take back your identity, change your narrative, and live your life as you see fit. Your elevation is a tacit statement that you are not returning because you do not want to return. You're unwilling to accept anything less because you desire more. The burden of what you carried for so long is weighing heavily on them. You bore more burdens than anybody should have to for years. When words failed, you carried the unspoken understanding, the unending forgiveness for things that should have been handled, the emotional labor that kept things afloat, and the continual checking in when they were too preoccupied or unwilling to do the same. You were the unseen worker in the background who kept things from falling apart, the glue that kept a delicate equilibrium together. They now have to deal with the unvarnished, unadulterated truth because you're gone. They were never in charge of any of the little affairs you handled. They never experienced the repercussions of neglect, so they took your efforts for granted. They were unaware that what seemed to be your affection or patience was really the strain of both of you trying to survive emotionally. They are now realizing that they failed to attend the difficult portions. The relationship's burden was never placed on them. While they coasted unnoticed and unregulated, they allowed you to perform that labor day after day. And now the weight is gone without you. The safety net, however, is also. They are no longer handling the emotional logistics that they contracted out to you. And all of a sudden, they feel as if everything is heavier. They have to deal with the void your departure left, not because they have matured. It is devastating for them to bear the weight of what you carried. It's unsettling because it's a mirror reflecting their passivity, complacency, and refusal to develop with you. It wasn't until you quit doing it that they realized how much you were doing. And the fact that they lost not only a person, but also a lifeline they took for granted makes that realization more painful than any argument. You were more than simply a presence in their lives. In ways they never acknowledged, they were depending on you. And now that you're gone, the echo of everything they wouldn't carry themselves fills the quiet. The cost is now full, even though you were their last free lesson. You were their last opportunity to learn without having to pay a high price. Their last free lesson. When others would have turned away, you showed grace. When it would have been easy to be impatient, you showed patience. Without resentment or guilt, you repeatedly and gently cautioned them in the hopes that they would see the flaws before everything fell apart. Because you knew that genuine transformation takes time. Rather than because you were naive, you were the kind of person who believed in second chances. However, there is a limit to the amount of free growth that may be provided, and that limit was finally achieved. They mistook your generosity for weakness or unending patience, so they strained it to its limit. They dismissed the importance of your warnings, the patience that underpinned your quiet, and the teachings that were wrapped in your grace. They behaved as if your forgiveness and presence were promises rather than presents. The lesson has altered since you left. Growth no longer comes with a price. The instant you left, the free grace period was over. They are forced to deal with the consequences from postponed transformation. Delaying growth makes the process more unpleasant rather than easier. The lack of your stabilizing influence now multiplies every error they committed while you were patient. They can no longer escape the expense they formerly could. They are at last facing this awful reality. You made every effort to educate them while it was still free. Without making threats or demands, you let them time to recover and become well. However, because of their inaction, development now has a price: regret, loneliness, and the pain of what could have been. They must make the payment in the form of lost trust and wasted time. The last free lesson was you. The last chapter, in which cautions were wrapped in love and gentleness was accepted with tolerance. The new chapter is far less forgiving now that the old one has ended. The weight of knowing they had someone eager to educate them for free and they let it slip away is the cost of progress, in addition to their lost opportunity. They'll be carrying this burden long after you're gone, and the price is full. Ultimately, the truth becomes undeniable, unavoidable, and difficult to ignore, like dust in a forgotten room. It's a reckoning, not simply a moment of sorrow. When they finally understand that you're not returning, they see that what they had was more than simply a person who had departed. It was a natural force that made the decision to rise, to break free, and to reject the cycle of denial and neglect once and for all. You were embracing your own strength, clarity, and tranquility rather than just ending a relationship. No apologies or hollow promises can repair that departure. Your patience, your grace, your unflinching effort, you gave them all you had. When it was no longer sufficient, you made the decision to choose yourself, something that many people would never dare to do. And in doing so, you demonstrated what true strength looks like, not in waging a never-ending war for someone who refuses to compromise, but in knowing when the fight isn't worth it. I am done being the exception in a story I no longer want to be part of. They are left to grapple with their silence, their wasted opportunities, and the mirror you painstakingly held up. This is not about regret or bitterness. Rather, it's about a deep sort of liberation. Everything they believed they controlled is trembling under the weight of your absence, which is like a silent storm. You're already miles ahead of them, free of their drama, their denial, and their incapacity to change, while they struggle to make sense of what they lost. The toughest reality they will ever encounter is the knowledge that you are gone forever. It's when the delusion breaks, and they are finally confronted with the full weight of what they had and what they let to slip away. But it's a fresh start for you, an opportunity to start again at your own pace, to live a life that is characterized by the strength of what you have chosen to become rather than by what you have left behind, and to foster calm where there was once turmoil. Their tale no longer includes you as a chapter. The most remarkable fact of all is that you are the creator of your own life. For more frank, unvarnished thoughts that cut through the clutter, remember to subscribe to the channel if this message spoke to you. If you thought this article was useful, click the like button. More individuals who need to hear this may be reached thanks to it. Leave a comment below with your opinions. Your voice can be the spark that someone else needs, and your story counts.